All right. I'm Peter Alessandria, and for the next 90 minutes, I invite you to be bigger than you think you are. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Let's take a look at our agenda for this evening. So, as usual, we're going to start with some announcements. Then we have our recommended reading. Then our affirmations of the day. Then we'll do some introductions and victories, followed by an audiobook excerpt from Chapter 6. In my book, Be Bigger Than You Think You Are. Come back for our topic discussion, take a break about 8:15, then we'll work on our assignment, do some Q&A, and wrap everything up by 9 o'clock. Reminder that today's workshop is being recorded and will be available on the BeBiggerToday.com website and YouTube channel within the next 48 hours. Please feel free to stop your video and or mute your microphone if you do not wish to be seen or heard on the recording. Be Bigger Than You Think You Are, author-signed paperbacks. I have a few copies left. This is the first edition. Save 20% by using the discount code WORKSHOP20 at checkout at BeBiggerToday.com/book. Comes with a 100% money-back guarantee. If you don't love it, you get your money back. But I know you're going to love it. And while you're there, check out my NYC photo book, New York Cityscapes. This is a collaboration between myself and 6 other New York City area photographers. We each have our own unique take on the NYC skyline and the landmarks that make the Big Apple the great city that it is. On sale for $16.95 at BeBiggerToday.com/bookstore. And I'm happy to sign that for you as well. Still have the audiobook available for pre-order. I'm actually making great progress on this. I can't give an exact date, but it will be soon. It's actually closer to 10 hours now, available for pre-order at $9.99 at BeBiggerToday.com/bookstore. This also comes with a full money-back guarantee. If you don't love it, just let me know. I'll send you your money back. But I know you're going to love it. While you're there, check out some merch, hats and t-shirts. Use discount code MERCH20 at checkout to save on the unisex, one-size-fits-all hats and t-shirts. BeBiggerToday.com/merch. And you can also check out my original art and photography. These are all professionally framed, signed prints of my original landscape, cityscape, and abstract images, gallery wrap canvas prints. And here's a little commercial for you guys. Peter's photos and abstract designs are uniquely beautiful, one-of-a-kind works of art. These gallery-wrap canvas prints are set in a contemporary shadow box floating frame and will enhance the beauty of any home or office. Available in 4 different sizes, each piece is professionally framed and comes complete and ready to hang. Frames are available in your choice of black, white, or brown, and each is signed by the artist. Peter's original art and photography will make a great gift for a client, for yourself, or someone you love. Order yours today. Check it out at BeBiggerToday.com/art-photography. And while you're there, check out some of my NYC souvenirs. These are the refrigerator magnets, the forgiveness refrigerator magnets. These are my original photos on NYC refrigerator magnets, available on my website, BeBiggerToday.com/merch. And I'm available for one-on-one coaching and or corporate consulting. If you have a business, you'd like me to come in and speak to your sales team, your management team, on how they can be bigger than they think they are. Or if you're a creative person, a photographer, an artist, a writer, and you would like some help on how you could be bigger than you think you are, reach out to me through the website at BeBiggerToday.com and we'll set it up. And my most recent podcast is on the Fit for Joy podcast. This was a wonderful conversation I had with Valeria, and it's available. You can go to my website, BeBiggerToday.com, look for this photo, click on it, and it will take you to that podcast. And finally, I'm accepting donations to continue to offer the workshop at no charge and keep it open to everyone. A suggested donation of $5 per week or $20 per month is suggested. Send your contribution to paypal.me/Peter Alessandria. That's all one word. And thanks so much for your support. All right, so let's kick off the evening with our recommended reading. So the seven habits of highly effective people, written by Stephen Covey. Now, this is another one of those oldie but goodies. This book was published in 1989, and I probably read it right around that time, and it's stuck with me ever since. So this is a wonderful little book. The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People is very well regarded within the business book circles. A lot of people in big corporations or small businesses have used this book to enhance their game, to make them better employees, better leaders, better managers, more effective, and produce better results. So there's a lot of information. Actually, if you go to franklincovey.com, they have a whole online course that you can do for the book. They also have video programs from the book. They have, I believe they have people who will do one-on-one coaching with you on principles from the book. So check it out, franklincovey.com, The 7 Habits. And in case you're interested, here are the 7 habits. So number 1 is be proactive. Take full responsibility for your life. Now, if you've read my book, you know that's the title of chapter 2, taking responsibility. And I talk over and over again about how important it is for us to take responsibility for our thoughts, feelings, words, and actions. Number 2, begin with the end in mind. I actually talk about this in chapter 5 in my book. So this is the idea, the way Stephen Covey puts it, is focus on things that you can control. I also use it in the sense of setting an advance intention. So if we know we have, let's say some event coming up, or a meeting, or a presentation, or a sales pitch, or something coming up in the future, we can set an advance intention for that. We can decide in advance how we want that situation, that event to go. And what I do is I write it out, just a few paragraphs, and then in the weeks and days leading up to that event, you can review that often. And what you're doing is you're setting an advance intention, which means you're much more likely to think thoughts, feel feelings, speak words, and take actions that are consistent with the outcome that you want to produce. So for me, that's beginning with the end in mind. Number 3 on his list, put first things first. This, to me, speaks about prioritizing. So we execute on the most important priorities first. So it's very helpful to have things ordered in your life in the order of priority. How, the most important things go to the front of the line. Sometimes it's difficult to know what's actually a priority, so it can be helpful to speak to other people about that, get input from other people about how they might handle that situation, their take on the list, that kind of thing. Number 4, think win-win, working effectively with others to achieve optimal results. So for me, this is about mutual benefit. This is about collaborating with other people instead of trying to conquer them. It's about being of service instead of going to the situation with the idea of what am I going to get out of this. I think a more effective thing that I've tried to apply in my own life and I've seen other people apply is how can I be of service? What can I bring to the table? How can I make a contribution? And what would be the best outcome for everybody? Had a situation on that today, which I may or may not share later, but it was an opportunity for me to step back and say, what would be a positive outcome for everybody involved? Number 5, seek first to understand and then to be understood. So this is a principle of effective communication. I found in my own life that sometimes the most loving thing I can do for another person is just listen to them. Listen to understand so I can empathize and have compassion for what they're going through. So I can be present and then truly be of assistance, then truly collaborate with them, then truly be in a relationship with them. He talks about it within the context of an organization, a corporation, communicating effectively at all levels within the organization. Number 6, synergize. Innovate and problem solve with those who have a different point of view. To put it simply, synergy means 2 heads are better than 1. So again, something that I've suggested for people who are trying to make some changes in their life, whether you're a creative person or whether you're a stay-at-home mom or whatever your situation might be, collaborating with others, having an action partner is something that I've used in my own life to move my business forward, to move my artistic career forward. I have had somebody that I spoke to on a regular basis, usually every day. It was a short phone call, but it was a way to be accountable to somebody. It was a way to get feedback on things that were challenging me and to lend and receive mutual support. I was also of service to the other person, helping them in the pursuit of their goals. So two heads are better than one. All I can say is I totally agree with that. And then number 7, he calls it sharpening the saw. Seek continuous improvement and renewal professionally and personally. This means enhancing the greatest asset you have, which is you. So for me, this is just about taking care of yourself. This is about self-care. This is what I've talked about in the past, about how it's important for me to put myself first in certain situations so that I bring the best of me to that situation. The analogy that I like to use, that I've heard other people use, is if you're on an airplane and the oxygen masks come down, they always tell you, put your own oxygen mask on first. Because if you're gasping for air, you're not going to really be of much value to the person next to you. Similarly, if you don't take care of yourself, get enough sleep, get enough rest, make sure financially you're in good shape, make sure emotionally you're in good shape, sharpening that saw and through self-care, you're not going to be maximally effective in helping others, being of service to others. So for instance, I always know on Tuesday night I got to go to bed early, so I'm in good shape for this workshop on Wednesday nights. And of course, challenging yourself. You know, I always try to learn new things, either within the field of photography or outside of the field of photography. I'm always trying to improve myself. I'm always trying to learn more. My big thing now is quantum physics, spending a lot of time on YouTube, watching videos, understanding the general theory of relativity and special relativity and quantum mechanics and all of that stuff. I don't know why, I just find it interesting. I'm also interested in aeronautics, how they design airplanes and stuff like that. And so I'm trying to expand my knowledge base. I'm trying to expand my personal areas of interest, you know, that kind of thing. And that can only help. It may not seem relevant today, but when I look back on my life, everything that I've done in the past has prepared me for this moment. Stuff that I didn't think that I didn't appreciate at the time, that I didn't think was going to be of any real value for me. In almost every case, it's all kind of came together and paid off in one way or another. So I like what he says here, sharpening the saw. I mean, that's really, you know, staying sharp, staying on top of your game, learning new things, challenging yourself. You know, that was a big thing for me when I started with photography. The way that I learned product photography was I taught myself. I'm totally self-taught in terms of being a photographer, and one of the main areas of my photography business is commercial product photography. So I photographed everything from cosmetics to computers to jewelry to children's toys to you name it, I photographed it. And the way I taught myself to do that was when I was just starting out, I would go to Kmart or Target and I would buy all these different products and I would bring them home and I would learn how to photograph them. And I always picked the most challenging products. So anybody who does product photography knows that one of the biggest challenges is managing reflections. So if you have an object that has a shiny surface, like that, you can see the glare there. You have to learn how to control that. And what it turns out is you're actually photographing what's reflected in the surface of the product rather than the product itself. So I would buy things like mirrors, I would buy things like anything covered with chrome or that had a very shiny reflective surface, and I would practice on those things. And nobody was paying me to do that. That was just my education. That was my, and I was driven to figure it out. I was driven to try different things and say, okay, what happens if I move the light over here, or if I change the camera angle over here, you know, that kind of thing. And then the other thing I did was I studied other people's work. So I would study magazine ads, TV commercials, stuff like that, and pay attention in particular to the lighting. As my 14-year-old niece knows, I tell her this all the time, the Greek derivation of the word photography is to paint with light. So I had to learn how to manipulate light, how to use light. And so it was just this quest of sharpening my saw, staying on top of my game, making myself more marketable, and being inner directed to do that, being motivated from within to better myself. And it's paid off for me. I've actually, my product photography business has been one of my biggest sources of revenue over the last 12 years. And it's great because I can do it from home, although sometimes I do it on location. And that all came from me just, you know, saying, I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to improve myself. I'm going to make myself more marketable. It wasn't necessarily my passion in life, but I knew it was a way I could make money with my cameras, which was my goal at the time. My initial goal was just find a way to make money with my cameras. All right, so those are the 7 habits of highly effective people. Again, you can find this book anywhere. You can get a copy off Amazon. I'm sure there's an ebook. There's probably also audiobook at this point, so check it out. All right, so let's move on to our affirmation of the day. I love being alive. I feel so alive. Now, what I like about these affirmations is this idea of being alive. And the definition, a couple of the definitions that I found when I looked up the definition of the word alive is obviously something that's living or continuous in existence. But I also like this idea of alert, active, and animated, and aware of and interested in something. And being alive speaks to me of living with enthusiasm, of living with passion, of using the energy of life to engage with life. You know, obviously the opposite of being alive is not so great, but I think we can get to a certain point. I can speak for myself. I've gotten to a certain point where I wasn't so enthusiastic about my life. I wasn't so excited about my life. I wasn't so passionate about life. And I know, looking back in those moments, you know, I didn't love being alive. I was not in love. I wasn't feeling alive. I wasn't engaging life from an animated, alert, and active place. And I think it's very easy to feel overwhelmed by life. And when that happens, it's easy to kind of check out. So if I walk around all day saying, I love being alive, I feel so alive, I love being alive, I feel so alive, then, as I say always, we use our affirmations to change our state. We're changing our emotional state by having positive thoughts. We have positive feelings, positive words and actions, and all of that leads to positive outcomes. So I love being alive, I feel so alive. It shifts my mood. It changes how I feel inside, and that expresses outside. All right, so that's our affirmations of the day. I love being alive. I feel so alive. All right, so this is the portion of the workshop where people can either introduce themselves if they're new, or if you would like to share a victory or celebration from the past week, this is your opportunity to do that. All you need to do is unmute your microphone and take it away. So who wants to say hi or share a victory?
Hi, Peter. I'll say hi.
Hello.
Hey. Hey, Peter. Hey, everybody. It's Dee Dee. I'm so glad to be here. I just love being here. Everything that you've said so far assures me I'm in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing with the right people. So thank you for that. My big win for the week is I've lined up 3 people individually for different reasons to help me move forward. because I've been stuck in a couple of areas, and so it's just really great to have the resources, the willingness, and the wherewithal to ask for help, to be willing to receive help, and to at least contemplate the possibility of moving forward. So thanks. I look forward to the rest of the workshop. Pass.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Dee Dee. Woohoo! Good job. Collaborating with others, having support from other people when we need it, asking for help. That was a big thing for me, I got to say. I mean, for most of my life, I was not able to ask for help. I thought I was supposed to know it, and if I didn't already know it, then I was not good enough. I'm happy to say I'm almost over that. All right, who else wants to say hi?
Hi,
Barb?
Peter. Yes, I'm here. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Okay. It's funny that you brought up that book, and at the same time I said, oh, oldie but goodie. I mean, that book is, I didn't even think about when I did read it. I mean, it has to be what, 25 years ago or something like that, 20 years ago? Is that what you were saying?
It was
when it
published
first
in
came out?
1989. So yes, it's what is that? It's 30
Yeah,
years ago.
it's amazing. And so, when you talked about the 7 habits, I mean, some of them, I mean, to me, I've always used win-win. I know you've heard it other places, but I bet you he's the first one that really got my attention with that. And I've always used that. I think it's a great thing. Why not have a win-win situation than anything other than that? So I think I want to look into that book again. It was great. I do remember somebody used it very much for being a salesman, and it was his like Bible every day to go out for sales and everything, and it really helped him. All right, and as far as victories, me and the computer, I went over Jen's, and they didn't set it up. Of course, they couldn't set it up exactly the way you said it, but I did get everything that I needed. And I also have Zoom on my new computer, and you can see that I didn't use it yet. I kind of was running late today, so I was like, the computer just makes me, it's like, I've got to think about it. So I'm back on my little iPad, but I will hopefully be on a bigger computer next week. So I did get it all set up.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah, just like you said, it would happen.
I knew you could do it.
Right. Well, we knew it was going to happen. I mean, why not? All right. So hello, and everything you said tonight was sounding great.
Awesome. Glad you're here.
Talk to you later.
Thanks, Barb.
Okay.
Who else would like to say hi or share a victory?
Hi, Peter. It's Michelle.
Hey, Michelle.
Hi. I found out that I had submitted my photos to somebody, and they were able to get in contact with our town library, and the town library was able to share it virtually, or online for Facebook, and it got submitted to the library. So I think that's a victory.
That is awesome.
Right?
Good for you.
I know, right? That's exciting. That made me happy. Then I don't know if it's a victory, or I don't know how you would perceive this, but I share my photo with a professional, and they showed it to somebody they work with, and I'm on their email, and I got a newsletter, and I'm like, I said, that photo looks awfully familiar. I'm like, let me look through my camera roll. And I'm like, they use my photo on their newsletter. And I'm like, but they never gave me credit, and they never used my name. So in a way, I was really taken back, and I was like, it was sort of hurtful, but I didn't address it to them. But in a way, I was talking to a friend, and she's like, that's a compliment, Michelle.
Well, that's great. That is a compliment. And
Yeah.
I've had that situation before. Excuse me. And what I did reach out to them, but it was very positive. It wasn't confrontational.
Right.
It was like, wow, I'm so excited that you liked my photo enough to use it in your newsletter. Or, in this case, it was actually I think it was a newsletter. It might have been a blog post or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm thrilled at this. I love this. And would it be okay if you gave me credit for that, so people knew that it was my photo? And maybe could you put a link, to my website or my Facebook page or my Instagram? And it happened a couple of times, and they were always willing to do that. And
Okay.
it wasn't like, you stole my photo. It was
Right.
like, turn it into something positive,
Positive. Yeah.
because you never know what's going to come from that. So that's great.
Yeah. So that
And
that happened too this week. So that I was like, wow. It was like that photo looks so familiar.
That's great. And the other thing I was going to say was my first show as an artist was in a library. So don't underestimate
that.
That's great. And that's an outlet. So what I would suggest for anybody who's a creative person, you're an artist, photographer, public libraries are great for that. You can have your own show there. Sometimes they have waiting lists. I mean, a couple of them I did, it was like a year I had to wait to get in there. And obviously, now as things are opening up again, more people will see that. And the other thing is local restaurants and coffee shops. I did my first shows were either libraries or coffee shops and restaurants. So that's a great way to get your photos out there.
Okay. That's
So
an
that's
idea.
great, Michelle.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks.
Congrats. Good job.
Thanks.
Woohoo! Anybody else want to say hi or share a victory?
I don't know if I have cell phone reception, but my sister and I went skiing today for the last day of the season in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it was wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, that's so awesome. I love that you ski. And I know you had a little mishap last week, and now you're back on the slopes already. That's great. Good
Thank
job,
you.
Cynthia.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Anybody else? All right, so let us move on. So as I said, we are moving into chapter 6, the last 2 chapters of the book. A lot of great information in this chapter. This really sets us up for chapter 7, which is the chapter on forgiveness. So these 2 chapters really go together really well. So the title of this chapter is Would You Rather Be Right or Happy? There's a particular reason I chose that title. Well, I don't know if we're going to talk about it tonight, but eventually we'll get to that. And so we're going to start off now with the audiobook excerpt from my book, chapter 6. So hang on for that.
Chapter 6. Would you rather be right or happy? Being right is massively overrated. Scott Stable. The title for this chapter is inspired by A Course in Miracles. According to the Course, our minds are essentially divided into 2 main parts: our spiritual or right-minded self and our ego or wrong-minded self. Ego tripping. When we think of someone who has a big ego, we usually see them as pompous, self-absorbed, conceited, etc. As I use the term here, ego includes those characteristics, but it also encompasses the derisive, ventral part of our minds that usually comes out when we feel attacked or threatened. The ego thrives on conflict and drama and feels slighted and attacked by others for any or no reason at all. It divides the world into 2 groups, those that are for us and those that are against us. In terms of our early evolution as a species, the hypervigilance and distrust engendered by the ego allowed primitive man to survive in an uncertain and at times hostile world. These same traits, however, now threaten modern man's ability to live peacefully with others. Technological advances in war and weaponry mean non-peaceful dispute resolution could lead to the end of life as we know it. Our ego gives birth to the concept that we're separate from others and that what we do to another person has no effect on us. It compels us to judge and make other people wrong for their choices. Our ego tells us we're special and thus superior, while at the same time leaving us shackled with insecurity and self-doubt. When our ego is in charge, we tend to act selfishly, defensively, and take everything personally. We may be difficult to get along with and justify our harmful behavior on the grounds that we're just doing what we need to do to survive. Egoic thinking reinforces the belief that the world makes us think, feel, say, and do the things we do. We believe that something outside of us controls our actions and reactions, and that we have little to no responsibility for how our life is going. Who we think we are when we're operating from the ego is vulnerable, threatened, powerless, and a victim. Perceiving ourselves this way makes aggression and attacks against others seem reasonable. While most of us most of the time keep a lid on our ego, it's surprisingly easy to slip back into egoic-based thinking. This can happen anytime we see ourselves as threatened or potentially suffering damage or loss. On a global scale, atrocities of all kinds have been justified on the grounds of national defense or protecting sovereign interests. On an individual level, we can attack others without even realizing it. Aggressive driving or taking our frustrations out on a customer service rep are examples of this. I've actually called service reps back to apologize for my rude behavior. One time, the person on the other end was so grateful she cried when she heard me apologizing. And while most of us contain our egos in public, what happens behind closed doors in our own homes and with our own families can be another story. Verbal attacks between loved ones are often brutal. When those attacks turn physical, they can be fatal. Now, I've laid out this picture of the ego to get our attention. It's important to remember that when we feel defensive or threatened, it's easy for our ego to take over. Yet this doesn't happen because we're bad people. Having an ego is part of the human condition. Rather, it's because we haven't yet learned to see ourselves in a more empowered way. The key is to notice when we feel justified in attacking someone. Yes, we may need to take certain precautions in life, and there's nothing that says we shouldn't defend ourselves from harmful or inappropriate behavior by others. Yet when the ego is in charge, it's easy to misinterpret the situation and do things we'll regret later. As A Course in Miracles says, frightened people can be vicious. The projection of guilt. Projection is a process whereby humans deny the existence of an unfavorable trait in themselves by attributing it to others. One way we project onto other people is through judgment. We'll take a closer look at judgment later in this chapter. For now, note that judgment is a sign we're engaged in egoic thinking. Since the ego is inherently insecure, the negative traits we see in others are almost always qualities we're afraid are true about us. Stated more simply, all the stuff that bugs me about other people is usually stuff I dislike about myself. Or, as they say in 12-step programs, if you spot it, you got it. Projection is a defense mechanism. We project those traits which are too painful for us to look at directly. Recall I said earlier we dissociate from our negative thoughts about ourselves. Psychologists will tell you projection always follows denial and/or dissociation. Thus, by reacting strongly and negatively to what someone else is doing, I'm denying that the source of my discomfort is within me. Yet, I'm almost always unaware I'm doing this. Rather, I just think the other person is a jerk. It's only when I acknowledge that I'm projecting my own negative traits onto others that I have a chance to begin to heal those traits within myself. Being aware of when we're projecting can get a little tricky in that what I spot, I may not actually got, at least not in the same way as the other person. It's not uncommon to go to the other extreme to avoid being perceived as having an unpleasant trait. For instance, if I'm upset because I see someone else as a braggart, it may be that I've gone to the opposite end of the spectrum with excessive humility. At some point, I decided I was to remain silent about my achievements so as not to appear boastful. In this case, my upsettedness with the other person is probably more about the subconscious thought, why is it okay for them to brag about themselves when I can't, than it is about the bragging itself. I'm upset because they get to act in a way which I don't allow myself. It may also be that we're jealous of the other person. When I see another person who has what I want, if how I see myself in that moment is as someone who can't have that thing, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve it, I don't have what it takes to get it, etc., then jealousy quickly turns into judgment. It's important to note that jealousy isn't someone has something I want. Jealousy is they have it, and who I think I am is someone who can't or won't ever have that thing. As always, our feelings are directed by who we think we are in a given situation. When those feelings are negative, it's always and only because our thoughts about ourselves are negative too. The key to undoing our projections is to notice when and why we're upset. If the issue we're noticing in the other person isn't ours, then we won't be overly bothered by it. We may not like it, but we won't feel compelled to attack them for it. In fact, we may even try to be helpful if what they're doing is harmful to themselves or another. It's when our reactions swing out towards left field that we need to pay attention. Extreme judgment, moral outrage, or even just excessive irritation may indicate the problem is more about us than them. The idea that when we're upset about what someone else is doing, we're really reacting to the projection of our own unconscious guilt is completely abhorrent to the ego. Stop for a moment and consider how well received this idea is in your own mind right now. Yet given all that we've been talking about so far in this book, what else could explain our reactions? We said previously many times that what we think, feel, say, and do is always about us and never about the other person. Proof from my own life is that when I've forgiven myself for a particular trait, I'm no longer upset when I see it in others. For example, for a long time I was triggered by what I perceived as neediness. I was totally reactive to people who I saw as being this way. To me, they were weak, spineless, and generally repulsive. Then one day, shortly after getting into recovery for codependence, I was reading through a list of negative personality traits. When I got to emotionally needy, I realized, oh wow, this is something I do a lot in my own relationships, and I hate myself for it. It was quite eye-opening to see that a trait I judged so harshly in others was actually something I didn't like about myself. As part of codependence recovery work, I looked at my defects of character, including neediness, and began forgiving myself for them. It took a while, but eventually I was able to forgive myself for the times I had been needy in my own relationships. As a result, today I'm much less reactive when I come across this trait in another person. I can actually have empathy and understanding for them rather than judgment and contempt. All right, so that's our audiobook for tonight. And basically what we're doing here is we're taking a dive into the dark side of our personalities. And got some slides I'm going to share with you guys in a moment. I just want to preface all of this by saying, again, none of this is about beating ourselves up or making ourselves wrong for having an ego, for being egotistic, for the negative personality traits that may come from that. So this is about becoming more aware. And we want to be more aware so we can make better choices. All right, so if you notice some characteristics that I'm going to talk about tonight or whenever we get to it in the next couple of weeks, don't use that as an opportunity to beat yourself up or make yourself wrong. That's actually the ego at work. Now, so let's look at the first slide. So the first thing to say, so the ego is, in and of itself, our ego is, it's our individualized sense of self. It's basically what we consider our personality or our identities. It's a way that, it's a concept that separates us from other people, separates me from you and us from them. And it's born out of, it has some evolutionary value for us as a species. It was good, again, when we were those little tree-dwelling mammals, it was good to be suspicious of the other mammals and the other trees or on the ground or wherever they were, or the other animals. It was good to be focused on ourselves. It was good to be self-conscious, self-aware, in the sense of preserving ourselves, self-preservation. And that, in a sense, our ego, it was designed to protect us. It was kind of a survival strategy. The problem is, we talked about this in chapter 4, we're no longer tree-dwelling mammals, these little tree-dwelling mammals, and we've kind of outgrown a lot of what we still carry in what scientists call the limbic brain, the emotional limbic brain. And, a lot of that stuff is no longer serving us. And so, as I mentioned in the audiobook tonight, what may have worked in the past can now lead to our destruction as a species. When we have the ego is driving our decision-making and our choices and how we interact with others, it can be very destructive. And obviously that can be a problem in an age of weapon proliferation with, all kinds of nasty stuff out there. It's very helpful to learn to cooperate as opposed to seeing ourselves as separate
and what we do to another person has no effect on us, and all of that. Now, a lot of what I learned about the ego comes from A Course in Miracles and Eckhart Tolle's work. So those are good sources. This is a little different than Sigmund Freud's ego. It's a little different than Carl Jung's ego. This is really kind of the dark side. It turns into the dark side of our personality. Basically because of this idea of separation. We'll probably talk about this in chapter 7, and this will definitely be part of my next book. The idea of separation is probably our biggest problem in living together as a species on this planet. The idea that we're separate from other people, we live in separate towns, in separate cities, in separate states, in separate countries, and what we do here has no effect on somebody else, or what we do to another person has no effect on us. That thinking has created so many problems for us as a species. And every war that we've ever had, I would argue probably every divorce that there's ever been, every conflict, every bar fight, every conflict in school, it's all born out of the ego and this idea that we're separate. We're separate from other people. And we're separate from everything that makes up this thing we call life. The things that we do to the environment, the things that we do to other living species on this planet, and the things that we do to each other is all born out of this idea that what we do to somebody else or something else has no effect on us. Which is obviously false at this point, and yet it's very hard to break out of that. It's very hard to shift that type of thinking. Because to a certain extent it is hardwired. It is part of this evolutionary mechanism that at one point was vital to our survival, and I would argue today is no longer serving us. So these ideas of separation, what we do to another person has no effect on us, all of that creates all kinds of conflict in our lives. Now, we go a step further, and in this slide, and I talked about this again in the audiobook tonight, some of the negative characteristics of the ego are this idea that we're special and or superior to other people, we're better than other people. Our nation is the greatest nation, our city is the greatest city, our football team is the greatest football team. I guess to a certain extent, this pride, it's not that we shouldn't be proud, but this idea that we're better than other people, than other countries, it creates an arrogance, it creates a hubris that can be very destructive. And what happens is we lose empathy, we lose compassion. And when we don't have compassion, we're capable of some really, really terrible things. And as I mentioned again in the audiobook tonight, whether it's on the national stage, between nations, or in our own kitchen with our own family, when the ego comes out, it can be brutal, and we attack other people in very vicious ways. The quote on the slide here from A Course in Miracles is one of my favorite quotes from the Course, and it's, "Frightened people can be vicious." And I can only say I've seen this in myself, and I see this in other people. Now again, I'm going to come back to the idea that we're not bad people. We're not bad, we're not wrong, we're not necessarily evil because we have an ego and because we occasionally let our ego run the show. Frightened people can be vicious. The first sentence, the first word is frightened. It's understanding that when we're afraid, we can do some horrible things to ourselves and other people. But remember, we talked about this in chapter 4. I define fear as an emotional response to a perception of myself as powerless and or unlovable in a given situation. So it's this idea that I have about myself that I'm powerless, i.e. helpless, i.e. I'm not going to be okay, I'm not going to be able to take care of myself. It's that perception of myself, that thought about myself, that creates the feeling of fear. So I suggested that if I change how I see myself, for instance, if I know I have a difficult situation, a difficult event or situation coming up, begin with the end in mind, set an advance intention, and the advance intention is to see myself differently in that situation. And I consciously and deliberately conjure an image of myself that says, I can handle this. I'm going to be okay. Yes, it may be challenging, it may be difficult, it may even be a little bit painful, but I can handle this. I'm going to figure this out. I can ask for help. I have different ways that I can take care of myself in that situation. That's what reduces the fear. When I change how I see myself, it changes the emotional reaction that I have, the emotional response, which changes my words and actions, and it changes the outcomes that I have. So that's why being aware of how I see myself in any given situation and understanding that when I feel afraid, it's not the situation. The situation is never the problem. I say this every workshop like 5 times. The situation is never the problem. The problem is always and only how I see myself in that situation. Now, as always, we're not making excuses for somebody else's inappropriate behavior. We're not giving somebody a pass on accountability because they're acting inappropriately and all of that. But I can't control that. I'm powerless over anything that's not my own thoughts, feelings, words, and actions. And that includes the thoughts, feelings, words, and actions of others. That includes the external circumstances and events of life. But I can always change how I see myself. And when I change how I see myself, I have a different experience in the moment. It's the whole point of this book and these workshops. All right, so going back to our slide, insecurity and self-doubt. This is actually a byproduct. So on the one hand, it's like we're schizophrenic. On the one hand, we see ourselves as superior to other people. We see ourselves as special, as better than. And yet at the same moment, the ego fills us with fear and insecurity and self-doubt. So we're going to talk about insecurity. We've already talked a little bit about it within the context of our romantic relationships. Maybe next week or the week after, we're going to talk about on a larger scale insecurity, what that's about. But if I'm moving through the world filled with self-doubt, filled with insecurity, and yet at the same time thinking I'm better than everybody else, it can make you crazy. And it can make me say and do crazy things. When we're run by our ego, we tend to be selfish, defensive, we're easily offended, and I didn't have room on the slide, but we take everything personally. So if you want to know when you're operating from your ego, notice when you're being selfish, when you're being defensive, when you're easily offended, when you're taking things personally. The ego also loves conflict and drama. Eckhart Tolle talks about this extensively in his work. The conflict and drama feed the ego. It strengthens the ego in us. The conflict and drama becomes the motivation for our words and actions. It actually molds our sense of self, how we see ourselves. And that's the lifeblood of the ego. Conflict, drama, justified anger. We're going to talk about anger in this chapter as well, chapter 6. We always feel justified in our anger, and that's the most dangerous, most problematic, most destructive thing that we can do, is when we feel justified in attacking another person or another country or whatever. Justified anger. So that's a big tip-off of when I'm in my ego, when I feel justified in attacking somebody else. Because how could you do this to me? How could they do this to me? Don't you know who I am? Don't you know how special I am? Or I'm a poor victim of your inconsideration. I'm a poor victim of your aggression, of your selfishness. And this is all stuff that feeds the ego. Again, Eckhart Tolle, he's much more eloquent at this, so check out his stuff. But, he really builds this case, and it's so clear to me in my own life. I see it now. And that's what this is all about. It's about awareness. It's about becoming conscious of when we're operating from our ego, when we're operating from that part of our personality, of our mind, which is not interested in peace, which is not interested in seeing our oneness with other people or with the environment or whatever. It's not interested in sharing. It's not interested in peace. And we underestimate the value of peace. I do at least. And I think a lot of people do. So I want us to become aware of when we're operating from this place of superiority, of insecurity and self-doubt, of selfishness, defensiveness. Chapter 5, we said defensiveness begets defensiveness, and anger begets anger. The biggest tip-off for me, though, is when I feel justified in harming somebody else. When I feel justified in attacking somebody because of what they did to me first. When I feel justified in lashing out. When I want to get even. That's the ego. So whenever we feel justified in getting even, that's when we're in our ego. And again, I'm sure other people have different opinions about this, but I can say in my own life, it's so clear to me now that doesn't work. It does not. It escalates the problem. It doesn't solve it. And it's not a show of strength, in my opinion. We'll talk more about that later in either this chapter or the next chapter. Using force, using retaliation, bringing somebody else to their knees for what they've done to us, that's not true strength. That's not true power. I'm going to talk about that. All right, so frightened people can be vicious. Look out for when we're engaged in conflict and drama, justified anger, and attack. Now, I'm kind of paraphrasing some of and I've said some of this already, but paraphrasing from Eckhart Tolle, the ego is the little me. It's that little part of our personality. It's not the big, it's not our higher self. It's not our spiritual self. It's not our compassionate self. It's not our forgiving self. It's the part of us that says forgiveness is never justified. Compassion is never justified. It's a part of our personality that thrives on making ourselves right and making other people wrong. Would you rather be right or happy? We're going to talk about that. Making ourselves right and or making other people wrong. So I know now that when I'm into finding fault, when I'm into judging other people, judging them as less than, as not good enough, when I'm into being right about how they're wrong, being right about how somebody else is wrong, I'm in my ego. The ego loves that. The ego loves being right. And again, I talk about some specific examples in my own life in chapter 7, where it became apparent to me that, when I'm run by my ego or when somebody else is run by their ego, they will never admit that they're wrong. They will never admit that they made a mistake. They will never admit that, maybe there's another way of looking at this. So we want to be aware of that. We want to be conscious of that. And so it takes everything personally. Our ego, when we're in our egoic mind, we take everything personally. And who we think we are, we build this image of ourselves based on our past hurts and disappointments. All right, now I'll say again, other people can be jerks in relationships with us. Other people can do terrible things to us. We're not making excuses for that. And many of us have challenging experiences, both as children and as an adult. We often are victimized in certain relationships with certain people in certain situations. But the ego focuses exclusively on that. and builds our sense of self. Our self-image, how we perceive ourselves, who we think we are, is based on this litany of past disappointments, how other people have disappointed us, other people have let us down, or what they did to us. It's not to say that what they did was right. It's not to say that what they did was good or loving or appropriate. But we still get to choose the story that we tell ourselves about that. And in chapter 7, I'm going to suggest that for me, in my own life, and again, I see this in other people, it's helpful to begin to tell a different story about all that stuff, about what happened, about what they did to us, and or what we did to other people, because I can beat myself up for how the unloving things that I've done to other people. So we want to begin to tell a different story about all that, but the ego latches onto that, usually about what they did to us. The ego doesn't really want to talk about what we did to them. The ego never wants to talk about our part in things. The ego never wants to talk about how maybe we started it. Only want to talk about what they did to us and how could they do that to us. How unkind, how unfair, how unloving. And now I am justified in retaliating because of what you did to me. That's ego 101. I'm justified in retaliating because of what you did to me. All right. And then finally, one of my favorite topics, which is totally born out of our egoic thinking, is projection. Now, again, I alluded to this in the audiobook tonight. I'm going to talk more about this next week. But projection is defined as the process whereby humans deny the existence of an unfavorable trait in themselves by attributing it to others. Now, I say that projection is a defense mechanism. This came out of my work. Well, let me finish this. So it's a defense mechanism. We project those traits onto others which are too painful for us to look at directly. So again, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, although I play one on the internet. They will tell you that projection always follows denial and or repression or dissociation. And what happens is we judge ourselves harshly for having certain characteristics or qualities or personality traits. We judge ourselves and we decide that that part of ourselves is not acceptable. And we make ourselves wrong for having that personality trait. And what happens is we repress that because it's too painful to hate ourselves. Basically, when we judge ourselves or somebody else, we're saying we're judging them as unworthy, we're judging ourselves as unworthy of our love. And withholding love like that is painful. So we dissociate from that, we push it down. Now, we especially do this as little kids. When somebody else is doing that to us, we repress all of that stuff. But eventually it has to go somewhere, and it comes out as projection. So the example I gave in the audiobook tonight was projecting, when I see a trait, a personality trait in another person, and I judge them for that, when I judge them harshly for that, when I want to attack them for that, when I want to make them wrong for being that way, it's almost always a personality or a characteristic trait that I have within myself. But I can't see it, so I'm basically projecting it out there. So an example is being a braggart, being boastful. If that upsets me in another person, it's probably because that's an aspect of myself, personality trait that I have. We say in 12-step programs, you see this a lot, say if you spot it, you got it. And what happens is, because we haven't forgiven ourselves, Course in Miracles says, you see in other people all that you have not forgiven in yourself. So everything that upsets me about another person is something that I judge myself for. It's something that I beat myself up for. It's something that I have not forgiven within myself. Otherwise, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't be upset. I wouldn't, I as I said again in the audiobook tonight, I might even try to be helpful. Instead of attacking somebody who's exhibiting a negative character trait, instead of attacking them, I may try to be helpful. I may try to help them. I may try to, educate them or bring some awareness to the fact that what they're doing is not helpful. And that kind of thing. But when I react strongly and when I react negatively, it's almost always because that's a part of myself that I haven't forgiven, that I haven't accepted in myself. All right, so we're way over time. We're gonna take the break now. Again, if you're watching it after the fact or if you're new here, we're going to play the song. This song is Love My Life by Robbie Williams. We're going to take a 5-minute break. The lyrics are going to be on screen, but I can't actually play this song on YouTube if you're watching the replay because of copyright issues. But you'll be able to see the words. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Oh, let's look at the assignment for tonight, the exercise, ego tripping. Identify at least 3 characteristics of a person with a big ego. All right, so we're going to talk about that and much more when we come back. All right, so we're back. So we're going to talk about, I want to hear from you guys about identifying at least 3 characteristics of a person with a big ego. You can talk about what I talked about earlier, too, in terms of how the ego, how you experience that in yourself or how you experience that with other people. And again, the thing I want to say is, this is all for the purpose of awareness. It's just becoming more aware. I have yet to meet somebody who doesn't have some egoic traits, tendencies. I could certainly see it in myself. But what we want to do is begin to be aware. The biggest thing for me is when I feel justified anger, justified in attacking another person, or feeling superior, or wanting to make other people wrong, or acting defensively or selfishly. All right, so there's a long list. So I want to hear what you guys got. So who wants to kick us off here tonight? There are audience participation.
I'll share.
Go ahead, Dee Dee.
Okay, I'll be quick. So thank you. I'm so glad you said we could talk about what you talked about rather than the 3 questions, because I really identified, and I still identify with the behaviors that you described. I had a really difficult year when my father died, and it was a tremendously stressful time around some family dynamics that I'm still attempting to understand how to forgive and move beyond. And so that's why I'm here repeatedly, and look forward to talking to you about it, because I want to change the story. I want to change my story around it. And I have yet, so I must be in my ego, because I have yet to find the way to do that, the way through. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. And just remembering the year makes me really upset in my body. So I know I'm highly identified, and that must be my ego. Glad to be here. Thanks, Peter.
All right, great. Thanks, Dee Dee. All right. Again, I just want to say, this is difficult stuff. This is not easy. And again, we're not saying that other people don't act inappropriately. So this is not about taking responsibility for somebody else's part. All right? But I know that I can't change that. And I can't change them. And I can't change what happened, but I can change how I see myself, and I can change the story that I tell about what happened, so that it empowers me rather than disempowers me. Because I have walked around with stories in my head about what other people did to me that were totally disempowering, and became the justification for all kinds of passive-aggressive behavior, all kinds of negativity in my relationships with other people. And in many cases, they acted inappropriately. They, in my estimation at least, they were inappropriate. But I can't change that. And the ego, again, here's the thing, we will never, the ego doesn't believe in forgiveness. The ego believes in attack, in conflict, in drama. Course in Miracles says the ego wants us dead. It doesn't mince words. The ego can be vicious. So yeah. So great. Thank you for that. Dee Dee.
Oh, good. Maybe I'm not as bad as I thought I was. Maybe there's hope for me. Thank you.
Yes, there is. There is.
Okay.
And I relate to that. All right. Thank you, Dee Dee. Who else?
Hi, Peter. The thought that came to my mind is, everything you said about the ego was unbelievable. And as you were saying it, I felt like, wow, I'm exhausted thinking about all of this. It was really, it's like, oh my God, bang, bang, bang. But it was good. It's good to get all that stuff out and realize, because, all right, somebody who has low self-esteem never really says or talks about ego. Like you said, they're always like, poor me, or I'm terrible, I'm not good enough, and all that other kind of stuff. So, so you never think of it that way. Now, I was thinking that and I'm sure I am one of them. I always had low self-esteem. And if you come in contact with somebody with a large ego, no wonder why you're going to collide. Oh my God. It's like a fight waiting to happen every time that happens. So I think this also comes up in your situation when you're starting to become aware. You will right away become aware of somebody who has their ego, shouting out. And, once you're changing, I don't have to be that low self-esteem person anymore. And I can just let that person be. And that's all you can do with somebody who has a large ego that they don't even know what they're doing to themselves, no less everybody else. So you kind of neutralize, or I remember that word of, just dissolving the conflict by just, looking at them and and realizing, oh, if you could put ego across your forehead, there you go, But yes, somebody with low self-esteem and somebody with a large ego is always going to have conflict, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said.
Okay, thanks. That did come to me. Yeah. And that has caused a lot of pain for a lot of people. I don't want to say it didn't cause pain for the ego person, but what do you think? Probably didn't. It caused pain more for the other one.
Well, what I would say is this. So number one, low self-esteem is as much an ego trait as having a big head.
I know that's what you said, and it's hard to understand that, but I agree with you.
Well, it's an egoic, it's a false sense of self. Again, Eckhart Tolle speaks to this better than I can, but it's this false sense of self, and it's a personality that, poor me or wonderful me, if either one of those is not from the right place, they're both egoic, if that makes sense. Poor me as because I want everybody to feel sorry for me. And don't hurt me. Be nice to me because I can't take care of myself. And, that's as egoic as the person who thinks they're hot shit, Now, the second thing I would say is the person who thinks they're hot shit is usually covering up for their sense of inadequacy. So they're not in any better shape than we are, I mean, being boastful and having to impress people, or being, conceited in some way, that never comes from true self-love. That's always a cover-up for feeling like crap about themselves, I think. And I've done that. I've had my share of conceit, and I've had my share of poor me. And in both cases, it was trying to cover up the lack of self-love, the lack of self-acceptance. If I feel I'm good enough, then I don't have to tell everybody how good I am. If I truly feel that way inside, I don't have to impress people if I already feel like I'm good enough, I'm worthy. When I have to impress other people, it's to cover up the fact that I think I suck, or whatever. Now, not everybody, it may be different for different people, but that's kind of my take on that. So, the big ego or the small ego, quote unquote ego, it's two sides of the same coin. We're both coming from an empty place. We're both coming from probably a place of lack of self-acceptance, of self-love. And we got to find a way to cover that up.
Right. Okay, I get it. Yeah, somebody with a large ego, you always think that they're pushing and they're huffing, to get something done. And then the other person is always, putting things off. And if you think about it that way constantly, it's either or has to come to a middle ground. Yes. And that middle ground is self-love. So thanks. I got it.
All right, great. Good job. Thanks for being open. Anybody else want to chime in? Talk about your ego?
It's Cindy. My ego gets really adamant about being right, that I am right. And I laugh at myself today because, sometimes I am right, but would you rather be happy or right? Well, do I have to be wrong in order to be happy? No, but I don't have to be right either. The other person may be right, or may not be. They may think they are. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Maybe we see the world differently from different perspectives. So I loved the Alexandrian Quartet years and years ago, reading about the same situation, but from 3 different perspectives. And then with a 4th person that was a more integrated person, to be able to sort of stand back a little and see all of it in a different light altogether. And I really value that opportunity today. And I still want to be right. That's still my ego. But it isn't with this same adamantine, I must be right. That was once my regular state. So I'm looking at my pink cheeks from being in the sun today, even with my mask and my goggles on. But what fun it was. So fun. So thank you. And I'd rather be happy today, really. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Cynthia. Well said. And I'll give you a preview, so we're going to talk more about, would you rather be right or happy in the next couple of weeks. There's nothing wrong with being correct. All right, so I'm not saying, we're never correct or any of that, but the difference is when I'm right, it usually means I have to make somebody else wrong, and that's the problem. So if I can be correct and somebody else can be correct, or if the problem is when I make somebody else wrong. And the ego says that's how we're happy. And that's not true. It never feels good. As much as we think it feels good, it never feels good to make somebody else wrong. So finding a way that we could be correct and they can be correct, or at least they can be acceptable in our eyes, they can be worthy of our compassion, of our love. It's the difference between judgment and condemnation of somebody else because they're wrong versus compassion, trying to be of service to them, help them in whatever way we can, while being open to the idea that, well, maybe we're not correct. Maybe we got it wrong. Maybe there is another way to look at this. So it's becoming humble, removing that arrogance that says we know best, and making room in that equation. And this is really important with children, raising children. Correcting children in a way that doesn't diminish their self-esteem. Correcting, teaching a child in a way that boosts, because kids, there's a lot of things kids don't know. And it's very easy to make them wrong for not knowing what they probably have no way of knowing. And so when we can have compassion for that and understanding for that, then we approach them and in a whole new way, and so being right doesn't mean we have to make somebody else wrong, but according to the ego, that's the way we're right, is by making somebody else wrong. So I say we're correct versus we're right, and how do we communicate that to the other person? So great, thank you for that, Cynthia. Who else? Anybody else want to chime in on having an ego? Any of the stuff we talked about? All right, guys. So that's it for this week. If you were here last week, Karina Shea spoke to us. She read some of her poetry from her book and did some processes with us. If you didn't make the workshop, you can watch that online. The reason I'm bringing it up is Karina is making her book available for free for the next 2 or 3 days, the ebook. So if you have a Kindle or if you have a phone or a tablet and you want to read it on your phone, it's available for free. I put a link in the email that went out, but if you want that, you didn't get it, let me know. I'll send that to you. So it's available for free for the next couple of days. And I really enjoyed that. It was nice. It's nice to have somebody else come in and speak to us and work with us. I enjoy that. So I have my eye on somebody else for not maybe next month, but in the next month or two. And
Let me know if you guys want to do a hangout this month, a Sunday afternoon for an hour where we just informally kind of get together and hang out. If that's something you guys are interested in, we'll schedule that since we're coming into April. And I think that's it. Anybody want to say anything before we go?
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Have a good holiday.
Thank you,
you,
everyone.
Judy.
Have a great holiday. Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Yes,
All
I'm
right,
going to
guys.
say goodnight. Yep, good night, Peter. Thanks for everything. I'll talk to you
All right.
over the weekend.
Great. Thank you, Barb. All right, guys. So be bigger than you think you are today and every day. Have a great week. And I want to hear about all your victories and celebrations next week. All right. See ya.